The R5 is much better than the Sony A7S III and the Sony A1 when it comes to video. I'll tell you why, coming up. Now in this video, I'm going to explain to you why the Canon R5 is better than the Sony A7S III and the Sony A1 for video professional shoots. Now there's nothing wrong with the Sony cameras whatsoever when it comes to their quality and reliability during video shoots. But I believe that the R5 would take the cake for most sessions that I would want to record for professional filming. And here's why. Now in today's video, I'll show you two professional shoots I went on with the Canon R5. And yes, I used firmware 1.6, which is very important for this video. Now let's review some of the basic specs of the Sony A1 and the A7S III and compare them with the R5 so that we understand what type of cameras we're working with and what levels they're at. Now the Sony A7S III features a full frame 12 megapixel sensor that can record video at up to 120 frames per second in 4K. It's got in-body image stabilization, can film 240 frames per second in 1080p, has incredible low light performance, dual card slots, an amazing EVF, flippy screen, and all at a current price of about $3,500. Then up from that you have the Sony A1. The Sony A1 can also do 4K at up to 120 frames per second, though with a very slight crop. 60 frames per second and 30 frames per second 4K do not have a crop, though it's pixel binned. However, the camera features 8K at up to 30 frames per second internal recording for a price tag of $6,500. Now I know I mentioned pixel binning. Pixel binning is just a kind of way of like skipping pixels in order to be able to not stress out the camera too much when recording 4K. Now this is usually done in higher megapixel sensors in order to make it practical for the processor to be able to output a 4K image. Now let's jump to the Canon R5. The Canon R5 can do oversampled 4K at up to 30 frames per second, 4K that's line skipped at up to 120 frames per second without a crop, and internal 8K raw recording, which the Sony cameras do not feature. The price tag? About $3,900. Basically everything and more that the A1 can do, but at a cheaper price. Now let's take the camera out to the real world. I took the R5 to this place in Brooklyn that allows artists, musicians, and whatnot to perform their talents in a nice studio space. I've left a description down below so you can definitely check out more if you're interested in that type of stuff, which was an incredible experience. Now I use the R5, recorded oversampled 4K HQ in a relatively hot condition just to see how the camera would perform with a compression of IPB light, meaning that the camera would have to work extra hard on that compression for the video. Now in this project, I wasn't obligated to film anything in particular, just simply get as much footage as possible for the video you're watching now. So using the R5, I recorded C-Log3 in 4K HQ at 24 frames per second. This means that the 4K was oversampled from the 8K sensor, providing really sharp footage. It was very warm near where the performers were, and I recorded using the IPB light compression, which brings my first point of why the R5 is better. Its 4K 30 and 24 is the best quality 4K that you can get in a hybrid camera. And the fact that I recorded 10-bit 422 in a file that was just 80 megabits per second is astounding. As you can see, the quality of the video here is damn good. Can I go higher bit rates? Of course, up to 400 megabits per second in H.265. Now you've heard that H.265 is difficult to edit, but the IPB light files are easy to edit even on my much older laptop, and it looks superb because of the detail. Now compare this with both the A7S III and the Sony A1, and neither can come close to the sharpness in their video files. Now I'm sure you've heard in a million YouTube videos that the camera overheats in this 4K HQ mode. Well, those videos are wrong. All wrong. Heck, even I made videos mentioning that. Like I said, I have the 1.6 firmware. Overheating no longer happens in 4K HQ on the R5. I recorded over an hour of footage and there was not even a hint of overheating warnings, and it was hot in there. So basically, if I had the A1, A7S III, and the R5 to choose from for a shoot like this, I would have definitely chosen the R5. Now moving on, I had to put the Canon R5 to a test. A real professional test. In this next shoot, I had to film all afternoon. The purpose was to film a small, intimate, but exciting dance recital on the R5. Actually, it wasn't just one show, it was 3 shows. So I set up my R5 on a tripod and set the camera to record 8K RAW with 4K proxy. This would mean that the camera would be recording both to the CF Express card and the SD card, heating up both of them. Now I had a 2TB CF Express card, which I've linked down below, and I actually recorded in Canon RAW Lite so that I could get over 2 hours of footage. From there, I recorded all afternoon, which leads me to my second point as to why the Canon R5 is better. The R5 can record 8K 12-bit RAW internally, while the A7S III and the A1 cannot record RAW internally at all. Sure, they can record externally to the Atomos Ninja, but not internal. And as of today, the R5 is the only camera that can also output 8K RAW externally to the Atomos Ninja V+. At the end of the day, I was able to record all the shows, never worry about overheating, and fit all of the footage on my CF Express card and the SD for proxy, and deliver an incredibly sharp video in post after having the ability to adjust exposure and white balance. Finally, my last point, it's price versus performance. The A1 is $6,500, the R5 is $3,900. From a photo perspective, A1 is great, potentially better than the R5. However, from a video perspective, the R5 simply shines. R5's got the flip screen, A1 doesn't. R5 does internal RAW, A1 doesn't. R5 does oversampled 4K from the 8K sensor. The A1, pixel bins. The R5 uses the full width of the sensor for 4K 120 frames per second. The A1 crops in a bit. And the R5 is less expensive. The A1 does have an advantage with easy to work with codecs in post and no record limit. But the 8K codecs offer 10-bit 420 max for color information. The R5 does up to 8K 12-bit colors in RAW. And it does 10-bit 422 in H.265. Sure, the H.265 footage is horrendous to edit with in 8K, but it's an option. And I can tell you that off of my machine, I choose RAW most of the time because you get more color data and it's easier to edit those RAW files than it is the 8K 10-bit 422 files. Now let's look at the A7S III priced at $3,500 compared to the R5 $3,900. Now the quality of the 4K 60 and 4K 120 frames per second is better on the A7S III. And the A7S III can do 1080 at up to 240 frames per second, which the R5 can't do. And it's got a flip screen, and great to work with options for bit rates and codecs. A7S III is great for video. And that's without mentioning the fact that ISO performance and low light performance is pretty darn good on that camera. But the R5's low light performance is no slouch either. And the A7S III does not have internal RAW recording, no 8K recording, and no oversampled 4K recording. Also, the 60 and the 120 frames per second 4K on the R5 doesn't look that bad either. And it's great that it's still an option. But the R5 does have a trick up its sleeve that the A7S III doesn't. The R5 can record 4K 60 frames per second in crop mode. And this crop is sharper than the 60 frames per second from the Sony A7S III, which doesn't support 4K crop recording. The Canon's 4K 60 in crop mode oversamples 5.1K down to the 4K. Crop mode also allows for added flexibility to certain lenses to give you a little bit extra reach. So is the R5 worth the $400 for those added features? Heck yes. Now there's plenty of reasons why the Sony cameras will work for you and are better options for you. Specifically the A1 with its incredible photo taking capabilities at up to 30 frames per second raw pictures. That's pretty incredible, right? Or you've got the A7S III with the easy to work with codecs and options for the codecs that you can use and the lack of recording limit. Yeah, those cameras have their benefits. But when it comes down to the fact that a camera that really can do it all at a great price, that's caught up closer to the A7S III than it is to the Sony A1, but can outperform the A1 in so many specs, you got to realize that the R5, at least in my opinion, is simply the better option now. Now I've seen many other videos in the past that mention other problems that the R5 had, such as lack of dual card recording. But that's no longer an issue. You can now dual card record, and it's pretty simple. So a lot of things over firmware updates have gotten addressed, but this latest one that fixed somewhat of the IBIS wobble and addressed the overheating situation have made the R5 basically the better camera when compared to the Sony A1 and the Sony A7S III. Just my opinion, and you definitely got to give the R5 a second look. Now I've got a video coming up shortly on pretty much me kind of reacting to a lot of older YouTubers that have reviewed the R5, including myself, and have kind of mentioned all of these reasons why the R5 might not have been the best option for a camera, specifically because of these issues that now no longer exist. You basically have to throw away all of these older reviews because they no longer apply for the camera for the way it works today. So I'll go over that in my next video and show you why you can't trust any of the reviews and you've got to trust what I've got to say coming up. But that's for the next video. If you like what I had to say, leave a comment. If you didn't like it, tell me why Sony is actually better and outperforms. My opinion, at least for my work, Canon R5 now does it all. And as always, you can make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. See you guys later.